Hello everyone, in today's video we will be doing a light restoration on my old grandfather's anvil that he gave me. Both sides have ended up sadly falling off through use and work and a few scratches and dings. I do have a crack coming through on the very tail of the actual anvil, so I want to make sure to address that before it ends up breaking off entirely. So I'm going to probably grind a small little kind of a trough area there and fill that up, as well as some deep gouges in the actual horn itself. I'm going to have to go through and kind of fill those up a bit more, kind of define some of these 90s, at least get one of them done tonight, if possible. I was going to go with a hard-facing rod. Ended up choosing to go with flux core hard-facing wire instead. This one is, let's see here, double check, yep, 0.045. The reason I ended up going with flux core over doing normal rod is it's a lot easier to get my unit out here and just work outside instead of trying to clean up and work in the garage and stuff. This just seemed, for time's sake, on my end, a lot easier. Plus, my little Chicago electric welder here, the wire feeder. This is the 170 MIG from Harbor Freight. This guy actually has a hell of a long extension cable on it, so I'm able to plug this in and run the, I think this one, 100 plus or so, didn't actually check, cord on it. So ended up picking this one up off of one of our local listings on Facebook, and this one only ran me 120 bucks, so I can't knock it. It's been a champion for me, and I've used it a bit, but I know that it'll do the job just fine. So we're going to play around with that. I do know you need to preheat your anvil, and that way with these ones being cast steel, makes it to where you're not going to have any little hot points and have any delamination from the hard top versus the softer core of a lot of these anvils. So we're going to do some grinding, get it cleaned up, and do some welding. But without further ado, let's get to it. Alrighty, so this is the next day, and I went through and did quite a bit of sanding and getting everything nice, smooth, and polished, and getting a lot of the rust out, so that way I can kind of see and investigate how deep some of these cracks and chips are. So it makes it a lot more visible when it's a lot cleaner. So this edge here, I kind of dropped some of the points that were kind of coming up, so that way I didn't get any voids in there when I go to weld it. But I'm going to try to build up this edge to try to get more of a flat 90, something that's a little bit more workable. Fill in some of these voids where he had ground through with a 10-inch grinder, and some of these parts on the horn I was worried about, so I kind of cleaned it real deep so that way I could see exactly how far they go out. But they are pretty deep to put a nail in, and I just don't want the horn busting off. This crack too needs to be investigated. I was able to pick up 2 pounds of the welding wire, so I'm going to see how far that can get me on some of the more pivotal points, and then I can start going through and kind of cleaning up some of the other not pivotal points with it as well. I feel that I'll probably end up going through all 2 pounds of it, but I'm also going to see exactly how well this takes with some heating and kind of take my time, hit this a bit, move over here, so that way I'm not localizing too much heat into one spot and cause this actual plate to delaminate and pop off at all. So let's give it a shot. Alrighty, so I'll be the first to admit a few of these welds are not half bad, and a few of these are really bad. The wire from the Blue Demon is nice. It works great when it's working. The downfall that I have is, I don't know if it's the slickness of the wire itself or what exactly, but it'll feed perfectly fine and then just randomly catch on the nozzle and not actually feed properly through the tip. And it'll cause stops and stutters. You can most notably see that right throughout here, where it starts to go good, then stops. Then it starts to go good, and then stops. And it's annoying, but I'm going to work through it. The feed rate, because of that, I was playing around with trying to see if I needed to have a higher feed rate or a lower feed rate to kind of push it through. And that kind of caused some of these big goobers. The voids and cracks I was trying to fill got away from me a little bit, so I'm going to have to do some flapper work to kind of see where we're at with the actual material underneath and see how much has been filled and kind of go from there. The material itself being that it's hard facing, it's kind of hard to knock off this kind of slag on it here, so I'm going to kind of grind it smooth and see exactly where we're at with material underneath. I'm trying to fill voids and everything else. My grandpa didn't skimp when it came to drill bits and their quality a lot of the time, so when he was drilling through a lot of material and just used this as a nice flat table, he drilled into this pretty good in a few spots. So there's some of the little cracks and issues I was trying to fill up. Kind of hit the hardy hole and stuff a little bit there. I do want to work on this crack, but I want to get some of the more general facing kind of test out to see how the feed rates are before I absolutely goober this up. I can just grind it down smooth, so that's what we're going to do now and just see where we are at. Alrighty, so kind of figuring the machine out a little bit more as far as how it works with the welding wire. I went through and ground everything nice and smooth. I did get quite a bit of what I wanted as far as those main cracks kind of filled. I have some little voids to kind of go through and kind of hit a little bit more and dust down a little bit to some more solid material. And then I'm going to actually kind of wire wheel and then fill in these voids and kind of sand that smooth as well with a flapper wheel. The reason I went a little bit extra on this one and just kind of ground down is because I kept finding more voids in the weld, because I was noticing right here is when I was really having kind of random stop and goes with the wire feeding, not feeding, and it was causing the weld to start farther away from the material, which captures a little pocket of air, and then it goes around it and you get these voids out of that. And other than that, everything looked to be kind of going where I wanted it to. This filled in a lot faster than I expected. This is probably one of my best welds on this thing, and of course it was way too big, and I had to spend a lot of time bringing that back down and kind of wasting the material I laid down, which is alright. It's a learning process. I kind of expected not to get this much material out of what I've done so far by any means. I thought this was going to be about 3 or 4 passes to get here, just because wire feed is a lot thinner than normal electrode on the end of like a stinger. So this is actually filling in quite nicely, and the way that there's almost zero slag is quite surprising. You have just the tiniest thin coating on the outside of the steel, so what bead you lay you don't really have to go through and chip off for the most part. You get this material, which is the actual wire itself, right underneath the tiniest little skin, which is awesome. I already filled in quite a few little drilling holes. There's one void right here I'm going to have to fill, but otherwise the horn I feel really good about. So I'll do a light grind with a grinding disc probably right here to kind of create a void to fill with that crack. It's got more prominent now that I've kind of polished and cleaned it up. I can really see where that crack is going through on the tail, which I really don't want that to break off. And yeah, I think I'm going to try to hit this again and get this finished off. I feel more confident on this side. This is the easier side. I figured I could kind of goober it up and mess up on this end because so much material had been removed over time just with use on the anvil. But I'm really happy to start seeing that shoulder kind of approaching. I have some skeleton bones to work with now, and I can kind of clean her up and continue on. So let's give her another pass. Alrighty, so we kind of live and we learn. This is my third evening taking a whack at this. So everything was going pretty well with it. I have some porosity, or as far as little voids that have happened from the rod itself. I found out that, as well as I have a crack right here in my last bead, as well as here and here. So what I figured out from this was, as I was going to town, having fun, getting everything welded up and grinding, but I waited too long in between heats. So what that ends up causing is that the weld itself cools too rapidly from the large chunk of steel kind of absorbing the heat out of it, that it can cause these fractures in the actual weld that was just laid. So because your base steel is not warm enough, which, like they said, or what I've read so far, you want these to be around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is where I was using this little Harbor Freight temperature thing to kind of give me the idea of what I needed for a radiant temperature, or something at least within close range. That was showcasing to me that I was just getting ahead of myself. The other thing was I was definitely getting tired, so when I was doing this last bead, I angled upward, and that ended up causing me to kind of blow out the weld right here in a few spots, which now leads me to have to not only run a weld underneath, but on top of this. So optimally, I was kind of testing the waters and ran a bead in the center, knowing I'd have to cover it anyway, and kind of getting my temperatures right. But optimally, my suggestion to you would be, in this situation, to grind your material nice and smooth all the way across, and then just stack beads back and forth after doing your heat, kind of going from one end to the other and then back, so that way you're not overheating one spot too much. Otherwise, you could start in one spot, stop, start, stop, start, stop. You're keeping that radiant heat around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the anvil nice and hot. The steel will soak and absorb a lot of that heat very fast. So when you heat, go back and forth, and it'll take a second, and that'll get that up to 300 degrees where you're going to weld. And then on this side, I actually didn't do that at all, which is where I'm guessing those two cracks came from, was that there was not much heat over here except for whatever residually kind of bled over. The front face here actually laid the best out of everything, but I have some voids because of how I was stacking the beads, kind of played with it a little bit. So for my own sake, I need to go underneath this, so that way this shoulder doesn't just chip and break off, as well as on this main point here, I've replaced material from here out. So I know that this is all new material, and I need to kind of fill in some of the voids on the top here, and these little skipping marks from when my grandpa used that 10-inch grinder on whatever he was grinding on top of this, and it skipped into the material and took some nice little bites out of it. Everything else has actually been really smooth and pretty darn flat, so I'm pretty darn happy with that. And then once I've got the main structural integrity for the top done, this side would have been pretty much good to go if it weren't for those cracks there and right there. You can see them just kind of kicking in a little bit. And when I'm grinding, I was seeing the shavings kind of actually follow right to those cracks, which I'm guessing had light magnetism to them. And from the blades rotation, ended up causing some magnetivity to the actual piece. So few touches up here on the top, bottom, and face, and then I'll see what I kind of feel like for just kind of making the whole place look a little bit better. Otherwise, as far as functionality, I could technically go from here, but I just want to make it solid and hit those bottom faces. So let's get to it. Alrighty. So can you restore an anvil using the, what was that, Blue Demon wire feed flux core hard facing wire? It is a 0.045. I believe you can. So, a few things. I am satisfied with this anvil the way it is right now. Now, that being said, there are some little flaws for sure, kind of in and throughout a lot of the welds, and just kind of how the actual wire itself works. Sadly, there is a bit of porosity that gets pulled into it. If the heat off of the anvil itself kind of cools too fast, you can pull in that porosity very easily. The wire itself in my Chicago Electric welder kind of bites and binds every once in a while, and then it catches up. So as you're laying down a real nice bead, it'll just stop, and then it'll kick off and almost seem a little bit faster for a second. So that being said, I do believe that it is still a bargain for what it was, because if I wanted to take this anvil as it was, have someone weld it professionally using hard facing, and then take the bottom of the actual anvil itself, run it on a lathe, flip it over, and then do the top of it properly, that price, if I knew the guy, bought him a couple cases of beer, what have you, I'd be looking at least $500 to $1,500. You can get up real fast and easy into the $2,000 and $3,000 mark when you're using professional high-grade lathe machines to make this absolutely perfect and the bottom absolutely perfect, because you can't just make one side perfect and then hope to shim the bottom. It can mess up the machine. You can end up with a super elongated one way or the other. Just real bad job. So they always implore you to do the bottom and then the top, so that way you have two perfect level faces to go off of. So not doing that, I'm not going to be spending that kind of money. It's sadly worth purchasing a new anvil doing it that way. So that to be said, as I said earlier, my suggestions, if you are to go this route, is to remove and make flat the material best you can on the side that is destroyed, just so that there's no mountains, valleys, or voids to potentially get created to get cold shuts or anything like that. I didn't do that. I just kind of went for it, kind of played around with it, as you saw in the video, and had a lot of little issues here and there along the way. So kind of take that if you will. But my suggestion would be to start a bead at the bottom, as far out as you want it to be, and just build off of that, going back and forth all the way to the top, and then sculpt that to either side. Now, I'm not getting this professionally lathed at all, so I use the top part as a reference and just let the disc set on one side and let it go off the shoulder and bring down those mountains till it met the middle. And I just did that on both sides, including the front here, and I did have to fill that crack, which filled pretty good, but there are some little dings and stuff that I could have continued just going over. The reason I didn't do that is I don't want to risk destroying the temper entirely of this anvil. Now there's a lot of mass here, so I'm pretty confident that at least the core of this has retained all of its tempering. So that was why I kind of traded back and forth. As you can see, I can grab this even after sanding the crap out of it because the heat disperses very well. Now this anvil is 90 degrees, but I can still handle it. It's hot, but it's not absolutely scorching. And because I never really brought that temperature up so drastic, I'm not really so concerned with this having lost its temper. Now, that being said, kind of take it with you will, grain of salt, not what have you, but I am absolutely astounded and super stoked with this. I can use this anvil, and if it does chip, damage, or break or anything, I still have quite a bit of wire left. I've got about a third left of my actual original 2-pound spool. Now, little trick for you. Amazon sells the Blue Demon wire, but they only sell it in 1 pound, 5 pound, and 10 pound. If you go onto eBay and through their actual storefront, which they have an eBay store that they sell through Amazon, so it's not actually an Amazon store, then you'll notice that you can actually purchase the 2 pound, which seems to be kind of off of their eBay store only. And it was only $4 more than buying a single pound. So at that point, I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. And with taxes and everything, it ended up running me around $40. So heads up there. Other than that to be said, that is the huge bargain. I ended up spending 3 evenings doing this at my own pace, kind of testing myself out and seeing if something does get damaged or broken, I feel confident to kind of get it back to this point again, taking my time, what have you. But now this is a good usable platform to go from, and it cost me $40 in time and labor in my welder. That's nothing in comparison to the, at the very minimum, $500 from what I was able to see in the market. Granted, you might know somebody who's just learning how to lathe, has a machine kick around. They're like, yeah, toss me some beer, let's have fun, let's just see if we can get this to work. But I'm curious on how good your quality is going to be. Now, granted, say my quality isn't amazing, but anyway, I'm rambling. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully this was a nice little peek at seeing this anvil, which I forgot to mention. This is a Henry Wright, England, warranted solid, and it's 97 pounds. Now, granted, I added material and removed a bit of material, getting all the rust and everything off. So, give or take 97 pounds, probably closer to 95 or 96 pounds, all said and done, even with the material added. So, thank you all so very much again. If you enjoyed the video, if you enjoy this, I'm happy to see this in working order and hopefully looking for it in future videos. Keep an eye on the channel. Make sure and like it. Subscribe to it if you haven't already. And hit that notification bell if you want notifications each and every time I upload a video. So thank you all so very much and have yourself a wonderful evening. I've been rambling for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of the rambling. Let's hear about this guy yakking too much in the comments.